Hello to all and welcome. You are at the September cycle meeting of Manhattan Community Board Five's Transportation and Environment Committee. This is, I believe, I believe of all of Community Board Five's committees, we are the first committee meeting after the summer hiatus. So welcome back. I hope everyone had a really good summer. I'm the chair of the Transportation and Environment Committee, EJ Kalafarsky. I'm here with my Vice Chair, Sam Levy. And we have two items on our agenda this evening. A update from the City DOT on their ongoing work on the vision for Broadway, and a presentation from the Fifth Avenue Association about their holiday open street plan. We will see how these conversations go. We don't currently anticipate, these appear to both be updates with presenters soliciting feedback, so we don't currently anticipate taking any votes on these tonight, but we'll see how the conversations go. And with each of these presentations, we'll give an opportunity for the presenter to show their update to everybody in attendance. There'll be an opportunity for members of the T&E committee to ask questions of the presenter, and then also an opportunity for any members of the public who are in attendance to either ask questions or submit a comment. Though we'll ask folks to be as brief and non-repetitive as possible, and in limiting their question or comment to 2 minutes when we get to that public comment session of each presentation. Finally, there'll be an opportunity, if it's necessary, to go into business session on each of the issues on our agenda tonight, where just the members of the committee will talk amongst themselves and decide what, if any, official action to take. Again, if we decide that it's necessary. And that'll be the process for each of the two items on our agenda this evening. With that, we will dive right into it, starting with the Department of Transportation speaking about their Broadway vision update. Do we have a member of the DOT in attendance?
Hi, it's Colleen Chattergoon from the New York City Department of Transportation. My colleague Jessica Kornstein is going to be giving the presentation. I think she's there, if you can let her in.
I'm here,
Yep.
Colleen.
Yep. Great, perfect, thank you.
Thank you. And
all right, welcome, Jessica.
Hi, and let me share screen. Yeah, and while I am entering full screen mode, I'm also joined by my colleague Dee Nelson, who can speak to a lot of the design details that we are presenting tonight. So just to start it off, and I'm Jessica Kornstein. I'm the acting deputy director of the Public Space Unit. I lead our design team.
Thanks, Jessica. Welcome. Yep. I'm excited to hear from this, and don't know how much detail you plan to go into. I think, as long as, I think maybe keeping the presentation to 15 or 20 minutes with the option of letting us ask more questions for detail if we want to dig into that, would be great.
Great. Yeah, and I think a lot of this is pretty familiar material, so I'll try and speed through. So great. Okay, so starting it off, starting with the corridor, as you know, we've been working on the corridor since Greenlight for Midtown in 2009. We've been really lucky to have sort of time on this corridor to really think through what the corridor can be and what a street can be, and really thinking through beyond the binary, as we like to say, so beyond sort of open or closed, right? So everything in between. And you can see this again in the work that we've done over the years, right? So the capital expansion in Times Square in 2016, up through the most recent shared street expansions at Flatiron, in the Garment District, and in up at Times Square as well last year. And tonight we're here to talk about the Flatiron Nomad 2022 shared street proposal. So looking, and then again, looking at what we've done in this district just last year. So looking at sort of precedent images, right? Shared streets both accommodate like all modes of traffic sharing the street space, but also accommodate all of the necessary vehicular access needs and parking needs. And then the bids hard work with the Nomad Piazza over the past couple of years, sort of showing what a plaza could be like on the 25 to 27 blocks. Looking at the crash data, the crash data along this corridor is relatively low, but we've seen that with the sort of high ped volumes and the really passive uses, they can be really brutal, as we saw in the 620 crash. But again, looking at those volumes, just making sure that our infrastructure is meeting the needs, right? So we just see way more peds and way more cyclists than we do cars across the corridor at peak hour. So this is AM volumes, this is PM volumes. And then sort of diving into the design. Well, sorry, starting with a little bit of the engagement. We did a number of public engagement sessions, getting feedback on our proposals. We also had a survey out where we added to that, sort of built on what we had learned through the public outreach sessions, where we got more sort of anecdotal and more sort of personal input from users. And then the Flatiron Nomad Partnership did their own surveys, both in fall of 2021 and in spring of 2022. So, you know, our survey results, we got over 200, which is actually very good as of the beginning of August. And, you know, of those users, 67% use the corridor every day or several times a week, right? So this is a high use group. Since the pop-up piazza has started, 66% route themselves through the piazza when passing through the area. 37% are cyclists or scooter users. And then the other thing that we saw through the survey data was that across the corridor, cyclists, 42% of cyclists do not feel safe from traffic. And then over 50% of the pedestrians think sidewalks are too crowded, right? So there's a real need that we're getting from the public through these sort of input to expand pedestrian and cyclist space and meet those needs. And then we also asked about how people wanted to use the corridor in the future, right? So we just saw a huge amount of outdoor dining, huge amount of strolling, seating, right? So really those sort of passive uses, but still a major player in how people sort of travel the city. And then what types of amenities people wanted to see, right? Planting, seating, public art, all of the sort of opportunities that we have with our shared streets and our plazas. So the Flatiron Nomad surveys, very similarly, right? 89% of survey respondents loved the piazza and wanted to make it permanent. 100% in spring of 2022 wanted to make the piazza permanent, and 94.3 feel as safer since the piazza was installed. And then again, these are sort of high users, so people who are just passing through, but also, sorry, what brought people to the piazza that day. Sorry, it was the public seating, it was people passing through, as well as dining were sort of the top three. So getting a sense for how people are using it now, as well as how people want to use it in the future. So looking at our proposal for the corridor, right, our project goals are to prioritize pedestrians and cyclists, really folding in both the data and all of the inputs that we've gotten, maintain necessary vehicular access, create additional public space, and formalize the two-way bike connection. We're looking at this in two phases. Phase one will be, we plan to implement in fall of 2022, and phase two, we would implement in spring of 2023. And looking at the sort of broad diagram, we would be looking at plaza blocks 25 to 27. So that's building on the piazza that the bid has worked on. and really expanding public space through there. And then north of 27th, it would all be shared blocks, and we would be formalizing the two-way bike connection from 25th to 32nd. In this first phase, that two-way formalization would end at 29th, where people can connect to the 29th Street crosstown. So looking at the plaza block, starting with the 25 to 26 block, right? We want to, as I mentioned, add additional public space, formalize that two-way bike connection, right? And really guide people through the intersection through here. We want to calm bike traffic. So if you look at these sort of diamonds and these pinch points, that's creating some sort of cyclist traffic calming through the plaza blocks. And support the outdoor dining that has made these spaces so successful already. 26 to 27, very similar, but again, really guiding people through that intersection, creating additional public space, formalizing that two-way bike connection up through the intersection again, calming bike traffic with those sort of pinch points and those diamonds. And then supporting, again, the outdoor dining that's made the space so successful already. And then looking at what the shared blocks are, right? So again, creating additional public space, shortening these ped crossings, again, formalizing the two-way bike connection. So guiding people through the intersection, guiding people safely onto the shared street, and then encouraging social cycling. And so this street width is the same as what allows for a car and a cyclist, right? So you can imagine cars safely passing cyclists if they need to through the shared street. But if there are no cars, as we've seen, the volumes are very low across the corridor, you can ride pretty easily two abreast, so you can sort of really enjoy the sort of cyclist version of strolling, right? What we think of as social cycling through the corridor, and then maintain curb access for loading, for carting, things like that. And then 28th to 29th, very similar, right? Create additional public space, shorten these crossings, in calm traffic, right? So it's both through the chicane, but also through these sort of tightened openings and entries onto the block. Formally is the two-way connection. So again, guiding those northbound cyclists through the intersection where they really are contraflow and really need the guidance, and encourage social cycling. So again, same with this before. So you can ride very easily with two cyclists through the shared space, while again maintaining access for curb access for loading. And then, you know, in this instance, working around the hotel curb cuts. So this is their loading dock. So making sure that they have full access through their loading dock. Next steps. So we are here tonight. We would be aiming to start implementation this fall, aiming for likely September, October. And then through the winter, ongoing visioning for the 2023 projects and beyond. Great. Any questions? I tried to keep it short and sweet.
I appreciate it, but still thorough. Thank you for that. Yeah, two things that occur to me that I'm curious about, and then of course I'll throw it to the rest of the committee for any questions. First and foremost, I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit on the just for a non-traffic engineer like myself, how the diamonds and choke points kind of regulate bicycle speeds. Is that something that will help to calm bike traffic that might be like electric delivery traffic, you know, as well, that might be trying to, obviously now you've introduced two-way lanes, so, you know, God willing, traffic going in each direction will be in its own lane. But can you talk a little bit about how those design elements will they calm, maybe speeding electric bike delivery traffic as well?
Yeah, that's the goal. I mean, so, and thank you for pointing out the 2 lanes. I neglected to point that out. And so the goal here, you're right, is to formalize the two-way cycling so that it's safer, right? So we already see the two-way cycling happening here, but you don't necessarily know to look in the northbound direction. So we think that by painting and formalizing that space, we are making it safer for all users, specifically the traffic calming measures. So it's both like a visual narrowing, so creating sort of a pinch point with these little sort of tucks in with the white lines, and you can see there would be a planter in the triangle, and then creating a similar sort of visual pinch with the diamond. We're still in discussions for what can be in the diamond to be a vertical element that would add to that traffic calming. So it's narrowing the bike path itself, so that cyclists have to slow through there. And then we're also pairing that with what we call the rumble strips. And so they are done in markings, but they are they have enough elevation that as cyclists pass over them, they sort of rumble like a rumble strip.
Got it. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, this is the same sort of design that's on the Hudson River Greenway. So a lot of people are familiar with this from the Hudson River Greenway has this same design on it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry, I lied. I have 3 questions. Then I'll throw it to other folks. The first one is the second question is just in reference to it's actually specific to, I think, the 25th to 26th plaza block. Under the current open streets, open restaurant situation, you do have a situation where the restaurants there just kind of fill the entire plaza block, like all the way to the bike lane, which really doesn't leave much room for strolling. Is there a plan to address that at all?
Yeah, that's a really hard question. So, I mean, part of this is we're still in the emergency program, right? So we are in the process of trying to figure out what the permanent program will look like. And then I think once we know what the permanent program will look like, we can revisit how the outdoor dining is laid out on the plaza blocks and make sure we have the balance right, the balance between public space and outdoor dining. We do want to support the restaurants. I think we see a lot of value in the activation they bring and the maintenance they bring to the space. And so it's really, again, finding the right balance. But I think that is, that's still in the works. And for this phase, we would be implementing around the existing dining setups.
Okay. Yep. That's useful context. Thank you. And then my final question is related to the 28th to 29th Street block. You've introduced in this design expanded sidewalks and the kind of chicane for the shared street here. I guess I'm just kind of curious. Was this the initial design for this? It seems like there's a quite wide sidewalk expansion that seems to be right around the location of the June 20th accident. Was this kind of the original plan for this block, or have you modified it at all since June 20th?
Yeah, go ahead, Dee.
The design wasn't really modified in response. It sort of already kind of looked like it was addressing that unfortunate collision. The spacing of where we did sidewalk expansion versus leaving curb access for vehicles was more based on the type of uses in those buildings. So it's just advantageous that kind of what the edge uses sort of lead us to in terms of which businesses benefit most from loading and which ones would benefit more from additional public space would have been very helpful in limiting, if not preventing, that unfortunate event.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. With that, and anyone, any other members of the Transportation and Environment Committee have any questions? Please feel free to use the raise hand feature. Yeah, Maki.
Thank you, EJ. I just have a couple of questions, and they're all related to the pedestrian crossings and the pedestrian space. I was wondering, first of all, in the public survey, if there was a question similar to the one for cyclists, asking pedestrians about their feelings of safety throughout the corridor. And the reason that I ask is because I really couldn't tell from the diagrams where the pedestrian spaces were. And it might be that the diamonds and the pinch points for the cyclists might cause, rather than to go through it, those cyclists to instead jump on the sidewalk, because that does happen on the West Side Highway as well. And I was wondering, related to that, if there's any type of interim measure that could be taken even while we're in the emergency program to make sure that we maintain safety for everybody.
Sure. Were you, sorry, I guess, is your question specifically about the plaza blocks or across the corridor? Like
across the corridor? I really couldn't tell. I can see where the cyclists are and I can see where the vehicular traffic is. I just really couldn't tell, and maybe it's because I really can't figure out where the pedestrian portion of those
yeah, and I should have started with that. So everywhere that's this sort of tannish color is pedestrian space. And then everywhere that's this sort of pinkish color is shared space. So this is where vehicles are allowed to go, but also where cyclists are allowed to go. I mean, well, all modes are allowed to go, but this is where vehicle access is maintained. And then green is where cyclists, see, green is the cyclist specific space.
So in this depiction, there's no pedestrian lane?
So in this depiction, there is pedestrian space here, right, to shorten these crossings, here to shorten the crossings, as well as slow traffic as it enters the corridor. And then a big public space expansion that would include some public seating as well as other amenities on this tannish section. And then again, more sort of shortening this crossing here with this space and these spaces as well. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm curious where the pedestrians should be going during the loading zone sections.
Sure. So, I mean, the sidewalk is still in operation. So pedestrians have two options. They can walk in the street as they, as we see them do through the existing chicane shared streets, right? So you can see people happily sort of crossing and walking freely through the shared street. Or they can continue north-south on the sidewalks and maintain that path the whole way through.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, thanks. The next up is David.
I think continuing on the same theme, I mean, I live near the Flatiron improvement and I work near the Herald Square improvement. And I guess part of my question is, in designing this, how much were you actually able to observe the behavior of pedestrians in these zones, as opposed to, asking them what they think their behavior is in these zones? Because I guess part of what I've seen in the time I've spent is that there's a fair amount of pedestrian confusion, in the chicane zones. People end up crossing back and forth multiple times because they're not sure exactly where they're supposed to be, or they just stick to the sidewalk because they're not sure whether they should be out in some of these zones or not. So, I mean, I tend to see, a fair amount of, almost randomness to the way people move through there if they're not familiar with it, which to me seems like it could create its own. I mean, luckily there aren't that many cars. So most of the interactions are with, as EJ said, with the electric bikes that kind of speed through these zones and will go anywhere if they feel that they're somehow blocked in the official bike path. So I guess it's the question is like how much of this is observational and how much of it was based on the surveys, and have you seen any of the things that I've mentioned in your study of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all of the above, right? We've both used the surveys and that sort of feedback as well as observations. I think there are a lot of lessons learned from the chicanes we did last year, so between 21st and 23rd, as well as between 38th and 39th, and 47th and 48th and 49th, sorry. And so I think amongst them both, it's more clear guidance for pedestrians, as you're saying. So expanding pedestrian space where we want it to act as circulation space. So through here, right? But then also adding more sort of passive recreation space in the larger spaces. But then also more clear guidance for cars. I think the thing that we saw the most through the last sort of iteration of shared streets was that, if we didn't have clear guidance for where parking begins and ends, it gets very confusing for cars and especially on the chicanes, where we didn't have clear guidance for where parking sort of begins and ends and where parking. And then in terms of traffic calming, where if we didn't have cars parked in the parking lane, the road felt much broader. It ended up just actually encouraging faster speeds. So I don't know if you've noticed, we've since gone back and added more markings to sort of help with those clarifications. I think those are the biggest takeaways. But again, I think these are our interim treatments. They're in gravel and paint. And so we are always observing and learning and always going back and making changes where we can.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think part of it also is, people spend their whole lives getting trained not to just step off the curb. And yet that's what we're asking them to do, to use these spaces.
Yes.
So I find a lot of times people are so hesitant, they're looking around, they're trying to decide, where can I go? Where can't I go? Which is not what you usually do as a pedestrian. The sidewalk feels like your safe space. So then as soon as we say, well, no, this is safe because it's painted beige, like that's a whole different education than what they've, what they did in Safety Town in grade school. So we seem to be in an in-between period of time on these things.
Yeah, and I would say, sorry, the only thing I was going to add is I think part of that too is expanding these treatments, right? The more we do sort of pedestrian treatments across the city, the more universal they are and the more easily understood they are. So while like changing the geometry of the street is more legible for cars sometimes immediately, I think cumulatively they sort of build towards like a more universal language.
Is there any thought to eliminating the curb between the sidewalk and these expanded pedestrian zones over time?
Possibly. I mean, I think one of the things that we are looking at long term is how our interim treatments translate to capital improvements, and whether that's sort of a direct geometric translation, right? So expanding the curb to sort of be the same shape, or whether, where all of the sort of pinkish shared street color, which is the brown in real life, would directly sort of translate to a raised street bed. But those are all details that we are still working on. And I think that's part of the sort of visioning, the long-term visioning process.
And the last question on where you showed the two-way bike lanes, is there, are you using those little bumps to separate the bike lanes from the pedestrian area? I see you've been rolling those out in some areas.
The wave delineators, so the sort of
yes,
we'll be using those.
So there will be, to answer, I guess, Maki's question also, it's, if you think you can just veer out of these and go through the pedestrian area, you're going to be going past, some kind of impediment to do that.
Yes, there will be vertical separation as well as the planters. And Dee, I do want to make sure that you get to weigh in, because I think you've thought a lot about how to move forward with our chicanes and also the sort of separation between the ped space and the bike space. So if I'm missing anything, please interrupt.
Yeah, if you want to go back to the next block north, I would say that is part of the reason for, we still have the gateway treatments for the contraflow cyclists going through the intersection. And part of that is because it'll be sort of a new traffic pattern. And so, we definitely want to keep people going northbound, sort of separated from the turn, and allow like a southbound left turning vehicle to have like a space to queue to let a northbound cyclist pass. But the reason for sort of going where we have the lane that's as wide as if we had a travel lane and a bike lane adjacent to it, which we did in some of our implementations last year. But the problem with that is that it feels very regulated and is, again, like creating a much more sort of typical traffic environment. And part of the goal here with the social cycling sense is to hopefully use the bicyclists to try to make the space feel more inviting to pedestrians as well, because there will just be like wide space, plenty of room for people to sort of navigate. And so to try to create that like environment that kind of anybody, any mode can be in this space, and everyone to be very aware of that. So that's sort of the reason for keeping it just a wider shared space instead of breaking it up into the individual lanes that would fit in that dimension. To hopefully sort of make it feel more like, oh, it's a plaza, it's an open space, and on occasion a car might be slowly at the signed 5 miles per hour advisory speed limit might be rolling through. So that's kind of the goal, is to use this. It's also that these blocks are way narrower than any of the other Broadway Vision segments that we've done in the past. So a lot of those are upwards of like 60, 70 feet wide. And the blocks here from 29th to 25th are only 42 and a few inches extra to work with. So we're both more constrained, but we also think going this route might make it feel more like it's to be socially navigated, and that might invite pedestrians into the space more.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Joel?
Hi, thanks, EJ. I have a question on the slide that you have posed, and then I have a couple other questions. But on this particular one, I just want to see if I'm reading this right. So you're saying this is a social cycling shared street. So you're going to have downtown car and truck traffic, right where you're pointing. And I'm going to be riding my bike up from 26th to 27th, and then I cross into that two-way bike lane, and then I go into the lane where the truck is coming downtown. Is that am I seeing that right?
Yes.
So I'm going to ride right in, head on into the truck in an area that's really only wide enough. And what's going to keep me from, at that point, I'm on a delivery bike and I'm going really fast, and I am going to jump on the sidewalk, or I'm going to jump somewhere. I'm not going head into the truck.
So it might be a little bit difficult to read and plan, but this is as wide as if we had a contraflow bike lane on it. So, or a regular bike lane. So it's a little bit hard to see, especially because the one box truck is sort of on center in the space that we're proposing, and its shadow makes it like feel like it's filling up the space more. But there should be 6 or 7 feet to the side of the truck as you're riding past it. So and again, and we're also, if you look at the intersection at the north end of the block, one thing that's happening, so the sort of block type switches back and forth. where on the blocks that have the existing pedestrian islands, we want to keep those because they have trees in them. They're a great amenity for people to like sit on. I've like had plenty of like sweet green salads right there and on that island. So we wanted to keep those islands, not have to remove them, not lose the tree. So that's sort of why these blocks don't have the chicane and the blocks that don't have the islands do. But regardless on both blocks, so even if we can't have the chicane here, we sort of have put that kind of chicane through the intersection. So the goal is that nobody to really try to push more than we have before, where you're never, as a driver, staring straight down, having that ability to have sort of tunnel vision going through the corridor. So really trying to slow people down and give a sense that this isn't a through corridor anymore. Which is, again, a little bit more difficult, given that this is one of the narrower segments of our larger like Broadway implementation. But so yeah, but it is a little bit difficult to read that width and plan.
Yeah, I think you said 6 to 7 feet. That's narrower than a standard bike lane, even a one-way bike lane that's with a buffer on the side to protect against cars. So it's a pretty scary prospect for a cyclist. But we're not in comments, so I'm just you answered the question. So yes, I'm going in a narrow space between the truck and the area that I'm not supposed to go in. Let me ask, my next question was really just, I didn't hear an answer to Maki's first question. I know the survey said that 42 or some percentage of cyclists didn't feel safe riding through the area. What was the result of the question, or did you even ask the question, what percentage of pedestrians don't feel safe because of cyclists, e-cyclists, and other motorized two-wheel vehicles?
So we didn't ask specifically about how pedestrians feel in terms of the pedestrian cyclist conflict. We did ask how pedestrians feel in terms of safety from traffic. And I don't have that percentage on hand, or I don't have those results on hand, but I can send them or I can work with Kim and Colleen to send them to the board afterwards.
Okay. And then my last question is there anything in these overall plans that is intended? I know you did just speak in answer to one of David's questions about the vertical elements, but is there anything else that is intended to beef up specifically the safety of pedestrians where bicycles are concerned, that either, closely stacked bollards that are too narrow for bicycles to get through, or walls or anything of that type that'll keep bikes off the sidewalk and keep bikes out of the tan colored space that's supposed to be for pedestrians?
Dee, I can start and then maybe you can fill in. But I think the sort of key pieces, especially through the plazas, one is the vertical separation that we were talking about with David and Maki. Two is having cyclists sort of chicane as they enter and exit. And then part of that chicane, which slows them down as they enter the plaza area, is also adding ped space at the crossing. So when pedestrians step off of the curb, they're stepping into pedestrian space rather than into the bike lane. So they have a little bit of breathing room. Dee, what else am I missing?
Yeah, I do think that's one of the most important things that we haven't always done for two-way paths, is we want to keep them against the curb mid-block so that you do have that vertical separation. But at the corner, just given every New Yorker's like knee-jerk behavior of stepping, 1 or 2 paces off the curb, is having that ped space there, and to allow sort of the overflow while you're waiting for the light or a gap in bike traffic. so that people can keep going in the other direction. So I think that covers the major points. And the thing about the wave delineators that's good is it does stop cyclists from crossing that membrane, that edge, but is, you know, if you're a pedestrian that's not in a chair, you know, you can still easily step through that. I think some of the difficulties always with traffic calming for bikes is that you know, anything that we like put to sort of like block cyclists from entering a sidewalk or pedestrian space or a ramp would be an ADA violation, because a wheelchair is as wide as a bike. So we're always struggling with coming up with solutions while maintaining access for people.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. All right. Not seeing any other questions from members of the committee, we will now give an opportunity for members of the public who are in attendance to ask a question or make a comment. Gonna ask that all questions or comments both not be repetitive with anything that anyone has commented already. I think I would just succinctly say that you agree with so-and-so, and you can leave it at that. If you have a question or comment to talk through, please limit it to 2 minutes. You can use the raise hand feature in Zoom right now to let us know if you'd like to join the queue. Looks like there will be 6 total, and we will start with Kurt Kavanaugh. Kurt, you can unmute yourself.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kurt Kavanaugh. I'm Vice President of Planning with the Flatiron Nomad Partnership. Just wanted to say hello this evening and let everyone know I'm here, and happy to answer any questions that may come up in regards to our work on Nomad Piazza with DOT, with the community, with stakeholders. One question that came up just a second ago about keeping, kind of channelizing bicyclists into the lane. One thing we have worked on with the Piazza, the temporary Piazza pop-up, is really adding density for planters at the edges of the spaces to harden them, to make them safe to safe public spaces, and also to get more people to bike through the lane itself. And we did a lot of observational research, both with bike and pedestrians through the last few months. And we're looking at really about a 20% contraflow or uptown cycling on the corridor. It's about a 40% delivery rate, 30% city bike rate, and about almost 30% other rate of people that are getting through the corridor on 2 wheels, scooters, bicycles, e-bikes, personal bikes, et cetera. And then with pedestrian usage, we also did a study in summer 2021 for the whole corridor Broadway, and noticed that really people are using Broadway as a large public space. And I think some of these designs help articulate some of the challenges and address some of the challenges we face, but it's also an incredibly busy last mile delivery corridor. So we see a lot of hand trucks, a lot of deliveries. So we're trying to just find the balance with everyone here on how we can best plan and utilize Broadway going forward. That's my comment.
All right, thanks a lot, Kurt. Next up will be John West. John, you unmute yourself.
I did not sign up to speak. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. You got your hand raised in the raise hand feature, but that's okay. Thanks. We will move on to Samir.
Hi, hopefully you can hear me. I'll try to keep it brief. I'm actually on the plaza right now. I thought it'd be fun to call in from here. So I'm between 26, 27. Anyways,
you're breaking up a little bit, which might have to do with being outside. But go ahead.
All right, sorry about that. I think it's like when my phone goes from 5G to ultra wide or something. Anyways, Please let me know if I break up again. I love 25 to 27. The plazas are great. I'm a little bit concerned about 27 to 28. A different member already mentioned it, but I'm afraid of, going up the wrong way or uptown and then running straight into a truck. But the questions I have, one is the crash on June 20th, I think, was between 28th and 29th, and it doesn't look like that section is going to be addressed in this immediate proposal. Are there plans to address that soon? It seems kind of odd that the crash site is not being prioritized right now. And then two is for signage. As bikes go north and they leave the bike network that you're building, these 3 blocks, will there be signage to tell them how they can get further uptown? Or is it just kind of be like fend for yourself kind of thing? Yes, thank you so much for the presentation. I'm excited to see it.
Okay, thanks for the question, Samir.
Yeah.
Jessica, go ahead.
Sorry. Okay. So we are doing work on the 28-29 block. So that's one of the shared blocks, and that's the block with the chicane. I don't know if you can see my screen now from your phone, but again, we're incorporating traffic calming measures as vehicles enter the block and exit the block, narrowing their sort of path at both points and expanding pedestrian space while also sort of shaping the vehicle path with the chicane so that, as Dee was noting, vehicles are never like looking down one corridor that they can sort of shoot down. So one of the blocks that we're working on in this phase 1 of this proposal is the 28-29 block.
Thanks for clarifying that, Jessica. And then some question about signage.
Yes, apologies. So yeah, I think we would incorporate because we will be planning to implement the next couple blocks in the spring. It would be temporary signage, but we would incorporate some bike leading signage to indicate where people can. So northbound cyclists can continue north by hanging the left on 29th and then connecting with the northbound lane on 6th.
All right, thanks very much. Next up will be a question from Jim Wright. Jim, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, Jim Wright. I'm a resident. Actually, I live just west of Broadway on 27th Street, so I walk and bike this area daily. Also familiar with the shared street between 23rd and 21st as well. I first want to just start by saying I am really excited, thrilled to see the continuation of the open streets extending further into Broadway. And from my point of view, the sooner we get to no vehicles on Broadway, the better. I think what we're seeing now is a interim measure, which a lot of concern has been expressed about safety. And I'm just going to reiterate, as a bike rider, the gold standard is a protected bike lane. So the idea of riding counterflow against traffic just inherently feels unsafe, and it would probably be enough for me to avoid going on those blocks by bike. I just can't imagine doing it. It's also extremely confusing to change the layout from block to block. Once you develop a certain expectation of where the cars are, the bikes are, where the pedestrians are, to shift that from block to block is, I think, confusing and potentially dangerous to all 3 classes of modes. So I would hope that could be reconsidered. Related to that, I find also this chicane idea where public space shifts from side to side really doesn't expand the pedestrian flow from the sidewalks because it's not continuous. You may have a wide spot and then a narrow spot and a wide spot and a narrow spot. So effectively, it's not expanding the sidewalks. I think there's a very simple solution, which is to keep the vehicles and the bikes and the pedestrians in a consistent lane through this area. So I would hope there's an opportunity to rethink that.
Thanks, Jim. We want to give them, do you want to give DOT a chance to
Sure.
maybe respond?
Okay.
Thanks.
I'd start by, it's a little, because we're only presenting phase one, it's a little, just wanted to make a point of clarification. There's really only one transition, and that's from the plaza blocks to the shared blocks. And so it is just across 27th where you have kind of like a transition from being in a separated lane. Otherwise, all the blocks up to 32nd have kind of this consistent pattern of the extra wide shared block with the contraflow sort of protection at the intersections.
Yeah, I think that doesn't really address the pedestrian.
Yeah, I was just addressing that one point. But, and then again, it's just, I will say that these blocks are, agree with your points about the continuous pedestrian path. These blocks are more challenging than some of the wider sections of Broadway. Just, maintaining sort of kind of critical loading needs for hotels and for businesses make it a lot more difficult than on some sections to create continuous pedestrian paths. So that is a challenge. Agreed that that's an ideal situation. Unfortunately, 42 feet makes that more challenging than it has been on some of the wider sections.
Okay, well, again, it could be addressed by simply keeping the lanes consistent from block to block. Two other comments. One, loading was mentioned, freight loading. And I know that's an issue for particularly the open streets. So I would support DOT creating dedicated freight loading spaces right adjacent to the intersections to Broadway, so that trucks that are delivering in that block have a place to go. Right now, what I see happening at the barriers of the open streets is often if the trucks can't find a parking spot, they'll literally park in the intersection right against the fence. And I don't think that's the intent. So I would just suggest that you look at creating commercial loading zones at the intersection of each of those cross streets. And the final thing I want to mention, this two-way bike lane will now connect into the two-way bike lane that starts at 32nd and 6th Avenue. And that's a particularly difficult intersection. So I'll just point out, riding south on 6th Avenue, approaching 32nd Street, it's a really difficult place for a bike to turn left because there's the crossing of the bike lane is on the south side of the intersection, but there's no queuing space there. So effectively, a bike who wants to turn to the east on 32nd has to wait on the north side of the intersection and wait for any cars to clear the intersection and then ride, against the light to make that turn. So I think that's an intersection. I know it's a very difficult problem, but I would just suggest some attention being paid to that, particularly since we're now merging two different two-way bike lanes. And beyond that, I just want to commend DOT on your public outreach. It's tremendous. I really appreciate your workshops on the street, your surveys. I haven't seen this in some of the other changes have been made, and it's great. I hope you continue that. It's a great way to get feedback. And thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Jim, for those additional comments.
Yeah. And
Um,
thank you for the input on 32nd. We'll keep that in mind.
Thanks very much. Next up will be David Akalis.
Yes, thank you. My name is David Akalis. I'm president of the West 50s Neighborhood Association. During the last presentation, I asked Emily Weidenhoff about the 2-lane bike lane, which for me is a bad idea. She explained how bike riders on Broadway were already using the bike lane as if it were 2 ways, which explains my frustration with this project. By law, bike lanes are 1 way. They have to go the direction of the traffic. Just because bikes are breaking the law right now and going the wrong way down Broadway isn't any reason to have 2-lane bike lanes. If there were some enforcement or some education telling cyclists and e-bikers that it's illegal to use the bike lanes against traffic, they wouldn't be doing it. But because no one has told them, no one has made any effort to educate bicyclists what the laws are, this is just a situation that's going to explode in your faces. The middle of Manhattan is not the Hudson River. These 2-way bike lanes are bad for pedestrians. They're bad for bikers. There's a lot of good in this plan, but the 2-way bike lane is going to be a lot of trouble. Nothing the city has done about bike lanes convinces me that this will be a success at all. There's no such thing as bike calming. All you have to do is go out in the streets and see it's insane out there. And I have no faith that the Department of Transportation or the city will do anything to make the bike situation safer for pedestrians. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David.
Sorry, EJ.
Yeah, did you have something, Jessica?
Yeah, the only thing I will say, I think, we do want to make sure that there are a huge number of northbound cyclists. We want to make sure our infrastructure is meeting the needs of the predominance of users. And so we think that by clearly marking so that expectations are clearly set by all users, so clearly marking the 2-way path, we are making it safer for not just cyclists, but also pedestrians who are crossing that 2-way path. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Jessica. Yep. Next up will be Jeff Poirot.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jeff Pyro. I'm the representative of 212 Fifth Avenue on the corner of 26th and going to 5th. If you look at this area, my building that I manage can't actually stop in front of it at the loading area or even on 5th Avenue. We have now a double bike lane going down Broadway, stopping our loading zone in front of our entrance for deliveries, for move-ins, for construction. We have a bike lane on 26th Street, which doesn't allow for my homeowners to stop and even get out of their car, as one of our handicap homeowners got a ticket the other day by NYPD because it's a non-loading zone. It's a non-stopping zone. It's a bike lane. And then we have a bus lane on 5th Avenue. So we've totally encased my building with bike lanes, a piazza, and bus lanes. EJ, I have to agree with you. The outdoor dining has grown. I think the restaurant right across on 26th Street has no more than maybe 100 seats inside, but probably has 300 outside. At some point, you can't allow restaurants to dictate what that space is used for. It's uncleanly, first of all, but it's supposed to be a corridor of walking, a calming bike traffic. I doubt it. I see it more as the Tour de France. The e-bikes alone, I almost got killed. 30-mile-an-hour bike running down the wrong way, almost killed me. I mean, it's gonna happen. You're gonna put more pedestrians with more bike lanes. And I think you have to think about the people that live there. I'm all for, and the building is all for, a pedestrian walkway, a space to go eat outdoors, even a bike lane. But there's, as someone said, I think it was Jim, you need to allow for access to these buildings, and you're not doing that. You did it for the hotel. you give a mid-block cutout zone, a loading zone. But on the last two blocks, 27 and 26 to 25th, there's nothing. There's no way for a trash truck even to come in and remove trash. So I think there needs to be a little bit more thought process of that and what you're doing to people that can't even get out of a car and unload in front of their own home. And that's a real big problem. I know the corridor is more commercial, but there are people that do live there, like Jim, that use this as a corridor, but also there's people that need to be able to get into their own home, operate a building, remove trash. But I think the suggestion of giving a little bit of a parking area on each entry or exit just will allow the middle of the block to be able to have deliveries. The food trucks are overwhelming to that area. And even as someone said, that they do park right in front, in between the crosswalks, and unload their trucks. I had a Cisco truck that I asked to move in front of my building the other day because he was just unloading food pallets. And so I think there's a miss here that doesn't allow for the people that live there, that pay taxes to the city, versus the people that are just using it on a daily basis.
Jeff, it was a pleasure meeting you the other day in the field. And so just want to highlight, definitely we're aware and have been really trying to integrate that access needs into all our projects this year. And like we had pointed out, there is additional parking that will be added in over there on the opposite side of the block from your building, understood. But it will add a significant amount of spaces, about 4 that are currently eaten up by the mixing zone, the little left or right turn bay that's cut into the bikeway currently. So when this block is close to cars, that becomes unnecessary, and we're able to turn that back into floating parking. And we are continuing to look, but weren't able to get a firm commitment on whether that additional loading on your side of 26th is possible yet, but are trying to add in loading for your door to 26th. And are always very willing to try to add additional access in any of our projects.
I appreciate that, D. It's just if someone's moving across the street with a truck for 8 hours, you're crossing a double bike lane, you're crossing a street. So just be mindful that parking on 27th, 26th, and other side of Broadway is great for those homeowners down that way. It doesn't really help the block of 25th to 26th. On either side. So it's just something to think about, that yes, there's a little bit of parking, but imagine 4-wheel dollies with boxes and trucks and refrigerators going across a bike lane. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Dee. Last comment from a member of the public in attendance will be Catherine Nettle.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, great. Thank you so much for your presentation, and I appreciate all the work that DOT is doing to engage with the community and further pedestrianize Broadway. I'm a frequent user of the corridor in a local I use it often biking around or walking, and I think it's really good to kind of make the whole area between Madison Square Park and Herald Square kind of flow into a nice corridor. I really like the designs for 25th to 26th and 26th to 27th. But as some other people have expressed, I think that from 27th to 29th, it seems dangerous to have bikes going in the mixing zone. And I was wondering too, given that for 25th through 27th, the DOT has established that it's okay. I really like how the block would just become a full plaza. Like, what's keeping 27th onward from becoming a full plaza? Especially since, Broadway is, the rest of Manhattan, like between 7th and 8th Avenue, there's no street in the middle. So why is there a street in between, 5th and 6th? And I'm just wondering, why couldn't we just, make all of it a pedestrian plaza with a 2-way bikeway, and then just have extra loading zones on 27th and 28th Street so that people can have dedicated places to unload deliveries and stuff? Because from my experience walking around Herald Square and Times Square, parts of Broadway that have been completely pedestrianized into plazas, there hasn't been a huge issue that with deliveries just walking from side streets. You know, Times Square has been like that for decades, and it's been or over a decade now, and it's been very successful being fully pedestrianized. So I was just wondering why the full plaza stops at 27th Street, and if there's any potential to, like, you know, maybe further down the road, make it into full plaza and just, you know, have loading zones to accommodate businesses and residents.
Thanks, Catherine. Anyone from DOT want to respond?
Yeah, I mean, so I think as Dee was noting before, we are looking to balance the needs of the users. So making sure that we are incorporating delivery access where needed and where it's being used now, and sort of accommodating those adjacent uses. I think you're right. I think there is, you know, as we see the city changing, there is a possibility of full pedestrianization. It's not something we're looking at right now.
Okay. Thanks, and thanks to everyone from the public for your questions and comments. Thanks to DOT for addressing those and for the presentation. You know, at this point, I guess I'll just see if there are any final comments from any members of the committee. In terms of official positions that King Road 5 has adopted, as mentioned in the past, we have a standing position whereby we support the overall concepts of the Broadway vision as presented to us back in, I believe it was 2020. And that's a standing position. So even as DOT has come to us with specific updates about specific blocks and reprioritization of what order the segments are going to be done in, what we've decided in the past is that we continue to there's hasn't been a need to change our standing position of supporting DOT's efforts to further reconfigure and prioritize the entire corridor, which is our currently standing position. And it doesn't sound like at this point we want to, for example, reverse that. Obviously, we appreciate DOT coming to us with for comments and feedback on all of these individual blocks. Obviously, you know, as we've heard, I think from comments, both members of the committee and members of the public, there are a lot of competing factors and particular situations on each individual block, and you know, no block probably is perfect to anybody. Some folks would like to see them all pedestrianized immediately. Some folks would like to you know, see more chicanes and sidewalk extensions. Some people would like to see fewer of them, but there does we appreciate at least the engagement that you've provided up to this point. I would like to throw it open to any members of the committee who would like to, you know, I think make a final comment or provide feedback here. Yeah, Sam.
Thanks, EJ. You know, I think, as you rightly say, we've supported this plan throughout from the very, very beginning. But I do want to mention the fact that every time we discuss shared streets, anytime we discuss bike lanes, we have asked DOT to talk, and increasingly we've asked DOT to put front and center the questions of pedestrian safety, perceived or real, from bikes. And every single time, I'm always surprised, it's come up 4 times on the call today, and I actually haven't heard anyone talk about, from DOT, about pedestrians, potential collisions and safety around speeding bikes in these areas. And I don't need it addressed in this particular forum, but I want to call it again, that we have asked this for again and again when we hear about presentations in this area, to talk about people's genuine concerns about speeding bikes going in wrong directions on shared streets, on sidewalks, and putting people you know, at some sort of risk. And I get the feeling that DOT thinks, based on data, this is not a problem. But as you can hear, every single time we have a discussion that involves bikes, it comes up again and again. So I would just ask, next time you guys come back, if you can put pedestrian safety amongst, you know, in shared streets and from speeding bike riders who often aren't following the rules, just put it in front and center and tell us a little bit about what you guys plan to do to make sure that that is not something that we hear 4 or 5 times every time we do a presentation like this. It would be very helpful to us, and I think increasingly important, as you can tell by the numbers of people who raise it every time. That's it.
Thanks, Sam. And yeah, I think I might just emphasize that as well. It was kind of indirectly addressed in regards to certain things like the wave delineators and separating in the double bike lanes from pedestrian areas, but certainly hearing it addressed, you know, as something that we talk about frequently on this committee and that we hear about from residents and members of the public who engage us as a community board, in future presentations, it would be incredibly useful for it to be something that is addressed kind of front and center as one of the competing priorities when we hear about the updates you're presenting, including, for example, with some of the surveys and metrics that you're presenting as well, to hear about how pedestrians are responding or what the pedestrian priorities are relative to safety, interaction with the bicycle lanes, et cetera. I think I'd just emphasize that, emphasize what Sam is saying as well. Yeah, Joel.
I won't rehash it. What you just said, EJ, about including in surveys and future surveys questions about how to as a pedestrian, how do you feel trying to cross a street where there are bikes speeding, or how do you feel on the sidewalk? I think that's really important. And as you said, it wasn't included in any of your previous surveys. I think it's important to include it going forward.
Is that something you think you might be able to ask about and include going forward, Jessica?
Yeah, we can work with the folks who design our surveys and see how we can include something that gets at that question.
Thank you. Yeah, if that kind of data can be collected and you know, included in, you know, the presentation of future reconfiguration in these phases as we see them executed, that'll be tremendously helpful to us in terms of presentation and useful information to us. Are there any other final comments or feedback from any members of the committee in our business session here? I see George waving. George, did you have something you want to comment?
Just a quick comment. This is probably the densest section of any city in the United States, packed with buildings, with people. It has this grid that covers everything. And then we have a diagonal going right through the middle of the grid. That's something we ought to be proud of, in a sense, because it's an oddball. But now we've made it a wiggly diagonal, which sort of, you know, minimizes its impact. To me, that just is, regardless of the micro issues of pedestrians, vehicles, and so forth, it just seems like a strange thing to do to a city. I'll just say, I think we should go back to maybe thinking about this being a totally auto-free set of blocks.
Okay, thanks, George. I just speaking for myself, it does seem to be the direction we're headed in, if not happening immediately. But that certainly seems to be what's happening more and more on the corridor as these different phases come to us. If there were no other comments from any members of the committee, and you know, obviously no contravening opinions about letting our current position stand, I guess we'll wrap up this issue. Thank you to members of DOT for the presentation and for listening to this feedback and for hopefully taking some of these suggestions under advisement as you continue to collect data and come back to us. Thanks to all the members of the public who presented questions and comments and participated here. We really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for presenting that timeline. We'll look forward to hearing you again and engaging with you further in the future. And you know, once again, thanks for all the engagement on the streets that you do that seems to be particularly helpful to members of the community. All right, with that, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda this evening, which is a presentation from the Fifth Avenue Association about their holiday open street plan. Is a member of the Fifth Avenue Association here with us?
EJ, I don't see them either as a panelist or an attendee. I've reached out to them to see what's going on. So maybe let's give them a minute.
Okay, well, I'll try not to take up folks' time for too long, but we'll give them just, you know, about 1 minute to see if they're going to join. Did you just like email them now?
Yes, yeah, I
Marissa?
emailed them, you know, a moment or so ago when you just wrapped up. So.
All right, we'll give them about 90 seconds, and if they don't show, maybe they'll still make it sometime before Christmas for another committee meeting to update us on their plans. My understanding is that it was the Fifth Avenue Association coming to us with their tentative proposal for the Thanksgiving to Christmas period. And to get our feedback and the feedback of the community this evening, which would then presumably be followed by them going to DOT with this proposal, engaging with DOT, perhaps also engaging with NYPD, who, as we've discovered in past years, at the end of the day is the arbiter of what streets usually get closed at Christmas and which ones don't. And then maybe coming back to us with a more fully fleshed out proposal developed in conjunction with DOT and or NYPD. So, you know, my understanding was that this would be a pretty preliminary proposal anyway, but it would be, you know, Fifth Avenue Association's opening bid. Guess we'll just give them a couple more seconds, but if they don't join, we will not take up too much more of everyone's evening. Do you know specifically who we are looking for, Marisa?
We are looking for Carl Wilson, and Celine Armstrong, I think is her name.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, they're not here. They're not indicating they're about to be here. Given them, I've tried to come up with things
They
to
have
say
my
for
cell
about 2 or 3
and
minutes.
email, and I'm not getting any response.
Okay. Well, then hopefully we'll hear from them in an upcoming monthly committee meeting. That I believe concludes our agenda for the evening. I will check here to find out whether or not anyone has new business that they'd like to bring to the committee according to our bylaws. We have one hand from a member of the public, David Baker. We will give you permission to speak. You can unmute, and yeah, do you have 2 minutes of new business for us?
Yes. Hi, I'm the president of the Ascot Co-op Board. It's located on 28th and Park. And there was some milling done in the street, and suddenly there was a new pole erected with a sign that said no standing at any time for 2 parking spaces. Over the years, all the parking around the building has been eroded and been taken for commercial vehicles and any number of things. But I wonder what our remedy is, because there was no public notice. There was nothing of any sort. I wondered if they put it up thinking it was taken down and they were putting it up because it was there before, but it had never been there before. And we have no parking around the building for, like I heard from other members of the public, there's no place for people to drop off their packages or have deliveries or anything like that. It just suddenly appeared, and I'm wondering what remedy we have. I was told by my managing agent this might be the best place for us to go to start the process, because it was just without any notice, the sign appeared, And now it's no standing at any time, which means that even disabled people, and we have quite a few in the building, they're unable to get discharged there. So I'm wondering what we can do.
Hey, so this is Colleen Chattergoon from City Department of Transportation. At the corner of what you just indicated, we are creating, we're extending the sidewalk. We're creating a pedestrian extension. And we've been in touch with Community Board 5 about this in the past. There was a delay, of course, because of COVID, and the building adjacent to the sidewalk, adjacent to the area where we're extending the sidewalk, they had to redo their sidewalk. So we had to wait for them to complete that work. So that's why we installed those signage. We took away 2 parking spaces.
So is there a plan to create 2 new parking spaces for us? Because we don't have any. There's just commercial vehicles throughout the week.
Yeah,
on the weekend, I guess you do, but there's really nothing here.
Why don't we talk offline? I'll be more than happy to help you.
I'd appreciate that. How do I reach you?
So Marissa has my contact info.
So David, I would say David, you could please email office@cb5.org. That will connect you with our district manager, Marissa, and she can facilitate the connection between yourself and Colleen at DOT. It's office@cb5.org. And
yeah,
forget
and
the email, you can find it on our.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
I'll be more than happy to help you, David. And again, at that corner, we're extending the sidewalk, creating additional space for pedestrians, and the Flatiron bid is going to help us maintain it.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Anytime.
Thanks, Colleen. Thanks, David. Okay, not seeing any other hands for new business. We'll bring tonight's committee meeting to a close. I want to thank, thanks, Colleen. Thanks, everyone at DOT. Thanks, everyone in attendance. And my thanks to all the members of the committee. Welcome back after what was hopefully a good summer. And we'll be in touch with you all soon.